Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we dive into today's case, I'd like to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe and leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Now let's get into the story. The winding road stretched ahead of me, a narrow ribbon of asphalt cutting through the dense, towering trees of the Oregon wilderness. I had been driving for hours, leaving the stress of Portland behind me, trying to outrun the relentless hum of life's anxieties. The forest, at first, had felt like a refuge, a fortress of ancient pines and cedars that blocked out the rest of the world. But as the day began to fade, the shadows lengthened, and the road seemed to grow narrower, more oppressive. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 5:22 p.m. It would be dark soon. The sky was already turning a hazy orange, the sun hanging low behind the trees, casting a golden glow over everything. It would have been beautiful if not for the gnawing unease that had been creeping up on me for the last 30 minutes. I hadn't seen another car in over an hour, not since I'd turned off the main highway onto this remote forest road. Crater Lake National Park was still at least 2 hours away, and I was starting to regret the decision to take this scenic route. "Get a grip, Megan," I muttered to myself, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. "It's just a road. It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Not really. The deeper I drove into the forest, the more isolated I felt, as if the trees themselves were closing in around me, swallowing the road. I rolled down the window, letting the crisp evening air fill the car, hoping it would calm my nerves. It didn't. The silence was unnatural. No birds, no wind, no rustling leaves. Just the low hum of my engine and the occasional creak of the old car's suspension. A small, hand-painted sign on the side of the road caught my eye. _overlook, 1 mile _. It wasn't much, but it was a place to stop and stretch my legs. Maybe taking a break would clear my head. I flicked on the blinker, even though there was no one behind me, and turned off the main road onto the gravel path leading to the overlook. As I pulled up to the small parking area, I realized how utterly alone I was. The spot was deserted, surrounded by thick forest on all sides. The overlook itself was a simple wooden railing, offering a view of the endless sea of trees below. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and stepped out, breathing in the cool, pine-scented air. The stillness was overwhelming, the kind that makes your ears ring. I walked over to the railing and looked out over the landscape. It should have been peaceful. It should have been a relief to stand there, far from the chaos of the city, the constant beeping of hospital monitors, the exhaustion that came with being on your feet for 12 hours a day. But it wasn't. The unease was still there, like an itch I couldn't scratch. Something about the forest felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. I pulled my phone from my pocket, checking for a signal. Nothing. Not surprising out here, but still, it added to the growing sense of isolation. With a sigh, I pocketed the phone and leaned against the railing, trying to shake off the nerves. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My eyes darted to the trees, scanning the shadows, but there was nothing. Just the endless stretch of woods. "Come on, Megan," I whispered to myself. "It's just your imagination." Still, the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up, and that nagging instinct, the one that told you to turn around, to leave, to run, was growing louder. Maybe it was time to head out. I turned away from the overlook and started walking back to the car, my footsteps crunching on the gravel. I'd almost made it to the driver's side door when I heard it. A loud crack. I froze, my hand hovering over the door handle, ears straining. The sound had come from the woods, somewhere behind me. It was sharp, deliberate, like a tree branch snapping under something heavy. Something big. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned around, eyes scanning the treeline again. The shadows had grown longer, thicker, and for the first time, I realized how quickly the sun was sinking behind the mountains. "Hello!" I called out, immediately regretting it. The word seemed to echo back at me, swallowed by the oppressive silence. Nothing answered. I stood there for a moment, paralyzed by indecision. It was probably just a deer, maybe even a bear. Oregon had its share of wildlife, but whatever it was, it didn't belong anywhere near me. I needed to leave. Now. I yanked the car door open and slid into the driver's seat, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. The moment the engine roared to life, I felt a fleeting sense of relief. I threw the car into reverse, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror as I backed out of the parking space. That's when I saw it. A shape. Large. Hulking. Standing just at the edge of the trees, partially obscured by the shadows, but unmistakable. My breath caught in my throat as my brain tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It was massive, easily over 7 feet tall, maybe more, covered in thick, dark hair. Its arms were unnaturally long, almost reaching the ground, and its eyes, God, those eyes, were glinting in the dim light, watching me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I hit the gas, my tires kicking up gravel as the car lurched forward onto the road. My heart was racing now, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror again. I didn't want to see if it was following me. For the first few minutes, I drove in silence, the road stretching endlessly ahead of me. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize what I'd just seen. It couldn't have been. No, it wasn't possible. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, a weird shadow, my tired mind playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling, that deep, primal fear. The certainty that I had seen something real. As the road twisted and turned through the forest, the last rays of sunlight fading from the sky, I forced myself to focus on driving. I just needed to get back to civilization. Once I was around people again, this whole thing would seem ridiculous. I'd laugh it off, tell myself it was just nerves, just exhaustion. But I couldn't stop my eyes from darting to the rearview mirror, just for a second. And there, far in the distance, standing in the middle of the road, was that same hulking figure, watching me. My breath hitched in my throat as I slammed on the gas, the car roaring as I sped down the narrow road, the trees closing in around me. I was not alone in these woods, and whatever was out there, it was hunting me. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles aching as the forest rushed past in a blur of dark green and gray. My heart was still hammering in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Whatever I had seen back at the overlook, it was real. I wasn't imagining it. The memory of that hulking figure, its eyes gleaming from the shadows, was seared into my mind. I glanced at the rearview mirror again, half expecting to see it following me, but the road was empty. My headlights barely cut through the thickening dusk as the sun sank lower, casting long, eerie shadows across the road. I needed to calm down. I needed to focus. Just get to the main road, I muttered to myself. Get to the highway, and you'll be fine. Everything's fine. But everything was not fine. The forest felt suffocating, the tall trees looming over me like silent sentinels. I hadn't passed another car in hours, and the longer I drove, the more I realized just how alone I was out here. I didn't even know if I was going in the right direction anymore. My GPS had lost signal miles ago, and the twisty, narrow road all looked the same. The car jolted slightly as it hit a rough patch in the road, and I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. That thing, whatever it was, couldn't be following me. It was probably just some kind of trick of the light, a bear standing on its hind legs or something. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I had seen its eyes. I had felt its presence. I swallowed hard, reaching for my phone. Still no signal. Of course. I threw it back onto the passenger seat in frustration. I didn't even have the comfort of knowing I could call someone for help if I needed it. Suddenly, a loud _thud_ echoed through the car, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. My eyes snapped to the side window, just in time to see it shatter, glass exploding inward in a burst of sharp fragments. I screamed, instinctively throwing my arms up to shield my face as jagged pieces of glass rained down on me, cutting into my skin. What the hell? I cried, my voice shaking. The car swerved wildly as I fought to keep control, my heart pounding in my ears. I could barely see through the dust and glass, but something massive had hit the car. The side mirror dangled, twisted and broken, hanging by a single wire. My hands were trembling so badly I could hardly grip the wheel. I forced the car back onto the road, breathing heavily, my mind racing. What had just happened? What had hit me? I stole a glance into the rearview mirror, praying I wouldn't see it, praying that whatever had hit my car was just a branch or an animal. But as my eyes flicked to the mirror, I saw it again. My blood turned to ice. There, standing in the middle of the road behind me, was the same hulking figure I'd seen at the overlook. It was closer this time, its massive body illuminated briefly by my fading taillights. It stood easily 7 feet tall, covered in dark, matted hair. Its arms were too long, its broad shoulders hunched over as it stared at my car. I hit the gas pedal as hard as I could, the engine roaring as the car lurched forward. My heart pounded in my throat, and I fought the rising panic that threatened to choke me. My skin prickled with fear, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the thing wasn't just watching me, it was hunting me. I drove as fast as I dared on the narrow, winding road, my eyes flicking from the road ahead to the mirror behind me, terrified that the creature would be closer the next time I looked. The broken window let in the cold night air, and I could hear the wind howling through the gaping hole, mixing with the sound of my ragged breathing. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the car again. This time, it came from above. Something had hit the roof. "Oh my God," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the wind. I slammed my foot on the gas, but the car bucked and shuddered, as though something heavy was on top of it, weighing it down. The thud came again, closer this time, directly above my head. My hands were shaking so violently now that I could barely steer, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I could feel it, whatever it was, scraping across the roof of the car. Its weight made the frame creak, and the back window was fogging up as if something warm and alive was pressing against it. I risked another glance at the rearview mirror, and my stomach lurched. There, in the cracked reflection, I saw a massive hand, covered in dark hair, with fingers too long and claws too sharp, pressing against the glass. The claws dragged slowly, leaving deep, jagged lines. "No," I whispered, a sob catching in my throat. "No, no, no, no." I swerved wildly, trying to shake it off the roof. The car veered dangerously close to the edge of the road, gravel spitting up as the tires scraped against the shoulder. I didn't care, I just needed to get it off. The roof buckled again, another loud crack splitting the air, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the weight was gone. I swerved back onto the road, my heart racing, my mind spinning. Had it jumped off? Was it still chasing me? I floored the gas, the car speeding down the winding road as fast as it could go. The forest blurred past me in dark smudges, and I didn't dare look back again. I just kept driving, the terror sitting heavy in my chest, making it hard to breathe. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the trees began to thin. Up ahead, I saw the faint glow of lights, civilization, or at least something close to it. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The car was shaking now, the engine whining under the strain of my desperate driving. I couldn't stop yet, not until I was sure it was gone. After what felt like hours, I finally saw the outline of a diner up ahead, its neon sign flickering in the distance. I pulled into the gravel parking lot, my tires skidding to a halt as I slammed the brakes. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached, trying to catch my breath. I was safe. For now. I looked over at the shattered window, glass still scattered across the passenger seat. Blood smeared across my arms and hands from the cuts, but I barely felt it. My mind was still reeling, my thoughts racing. Had I really just been attacked by that? Could it even be real? I grabbed my phone and stared at the screen, still no signal. I let out a frustrated sigh and leaned back against the seat, closing my eyes for a moment, trying to steady myself. "Okay," I whispered to myself. "You're safe now. You're okay." But I wasn't. Not really. I didn't know what that thing was, but I knew one thing for certain. It wasn't gone. And I wasn't safe. I couldn't sit in the car any longer. The shattered window was making the cold night air seep in, chilling me to the bone. Glass crunched underfoot as I stepped out, my legs trembling so badly I had to grip the door to steady myself. My head was spinning with fear and confusion. I glanced around the empty parking lot of the diner, expecting someone, anyone, to walk out, to see me, to help. But there was no one. The diner was dark inside, its neon sign flickering weakly in the night, casting a sickly glow over the empty lot. I swallowed hard, staring at the deep woods that loomed behind the building. The tree line seemed closer than it had before, as if the forest itself was closing in, a living thing watching, waiting. "Get it together, Megan," I muttered, wiping my clammy hands on my jeans. "Just go inside. You're safe here." But I didn't feel safe. Not even close. I knew I should stay in the light, where there were people. Or should have been, but my instincts were screaming at me to leave the car, to get away from this spot. Something was out there, lurking just beyond the trees, waiting for me to make a mistake. I could feel it. I could almost see it, moving in the shadows. The diner wasn't an option, not like this. I needed to stay alert. I needed to think. I clicked on my flashlight, the narrow beam cutting through the thick night air, and I scanned the edge of the woods, my heart pounding in my throat. Nothing. Just the wind rustling the leaves. Still, that sense of being watched clung to me like a second skin. I couldn't stay here. Whatever that thing was, it had attacked me once already, and I was sure it would try again. The diner's lights, the open space, wouldn't keep it away for long. I needed to move. I needed to hide. I grabbed my backpack from the car, hastily shoving my phone, wallet, and keys inside. There was no signal, no help, nothing but me and whatever was out there. My mind raced. I had to think smart. Stay on the move, stay hidden, avoid making noise. Maybe if I kept going, I could lose it. Maybe it would give up. I doubted it though. The look in those eyes, the way it had tracked me, it wasn't going to give up easily. I turned toward the woods, a chill creeping down my spine. It felt wrong, completely, utterly wrong to go into the darkness where I'd last seen that thing. But I couldn't stay here. It would find me if I did. One step into the woods, then another. The beam of my flashlight bounced across the uneven forest floor, casting long, wavering shadows around me. The trees were dense, their branches tangled together overhead, blocking out what little light was left from the crescent moon. I hadn't gone far before the silence hit me like a punch to the gut. The sound of my boots crunching on fallen leaves seemed deafening. The further I went, the quieter the world became, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I stopped, turning the flashlight off for a moment, letting the darkness engulf me. I listened, straining my ears for any sound. My heart hammered in my chest, loud and insistent, but there was nothing else, just the eerie quiet of the woods. For a brief second, I considered going back, getting in the car, and driving until the engine died. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't work. There was no outrunning this. Suddenly, there was a noise behind me, a sharp, deliberate crack of a branch breaking. I froze, every muscle in my body going rigid. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to see it. But I had no choice. Slowly, I twisted my head, sweeping the flashlight across the woods. My breath caught in my throat as the beam illuminated something. A shape, huge, hulking, standing just beyond the trees. My stomach dropped. It was there, standing perfectly still, watching me. It was worse than I remembered. The creature's massive frame was barely visible in the faint light, but I could make out enough. Its matted fur, the grotesque proportions, the way it hunched forward, almost like a predator about to pounce. And its eyes, those cold, gleaming eyes locked on mine, unblinking. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then it took a step forward, the ground beneath its feet crunching loudly in the dead silence of the forest. "Please," I whispered, though there was no one to hear me. Another step. Closer this time. My instincts finally kicked in, and I turned and ran. I didn't think, didn't plan. I just ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my legs pumping as fast as they could carry me. The forest blurred around me, the flashlight bouncing wildly as I sprinted through the trees, dodging branches and fallen logs. Behind me, I could hear it, those heavy, thunderous footfalls crashing through the underbrush. It was faster than me, stronger, and it was closing the distance with terrifying speed. I didn't dare look back. I stumbled over a root, nearly falling, but I caught myself just in time, my hand scraping against the rough bark of a tree as I pushed myself forward. The noise behind me was deafening now, the creature tearing through the forest like a force of nature. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I couldn't stop. If I stopped, I was dead. I spotted a large boulder up ahead, half hidden by the thick undergrowth, and I made a split-second decision. I darted behind it, pressing myself flat against the cold, damp rock, turning off the flashlight. The world plunged into darkness, the only sound my own ragged breathing and the pounding of blood in my ears. For a moment, there was nothing, just silence. Then, I heard it again, the creature's breathing. Deep, slow, and too close. It was right there, just beyond the boulder. I could hear its massive feet shifting on the forest floor, the rustle of leaves as it moved, searching for me. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to be invisible, to disappear. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound, every nerve in my body screaming with fear. The creature let out a low, guttural growl, the sound vibrating through the air. I could feel it, deep in my chest, as though the forest itself was trembling in its presence. It was so close, _2_ close. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would hear it, that it would know where I was hiding. I couldn't stay here. If I didn't move, it would find me. But if I moved, it might hear me. Either way, I was trapped. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours, the creature circling the boulder, sniffing the air. My body was frozen with terror. Then, just when I thought it might leave, the growl stopped. The footsteps stopped. The forest fell silent once again. I held my breath, waiting, listening. But the thing was gone. Or at least, it seemed like it. I didn't dare move, not yet. I couldn't be sure. It could be hiding, waiting for me to make a mistake, to reveal myself. Tears stung my eyes, but I bit them back. I had to stay strong. I had to survive this. But how? How could I escape something that wasn't human? Something that wanted me dead? I had no answers. Only the dark, the cold, and the terror gnawing at my insides. and the horrible certainty that this nightmare was far from over. The woods were quiet again. Too quiet. I had crouched behind that boulder for what felt like hours, the darkness around me growing colder and more oppressive by the minute. My body trembled, not just from the fear, but from the icy air seeping through my torn jacket. My breath came out in shallow, ragged gasps, and I kept straining to hear even the slightest sound that would tell me where the creature had gone. But there was nothing. Maybe it had left. Maybe it had given up. I wasn't so sure. The forest felt wrong, still somehow alive with the thing's presence, like it was hiding in the very shadows, watching, waiting. My body ached from crouching so long, and my mind was screaming at me to move, to get out of here. But how could I? The second I stood up, it might come back. It could be just beyond the trees, waiting for me to make a sound, to expose myself. I didn't have a choice. I couldn't sit here all night. I had to move, had to keep going. Staying still wasn't an option. Slowly, carefully, I rose to my feet, pressing my back against the boulder, listening. The silence was unbearable. Every tiny sound, the rustle of a leaf, the crunch of gravel under my boots, felt like a gunshot in the stillness. I gripped the flashlight in my trembling hand, but I didn't dare turn it on. The darkness might be terrifying, but light would give me away. And in the dark, I at least had a chance to hide. Step by step, I edged away from the boulder, my legs stiff from fear and exhaustion. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't risk it. Not yet. I needed to be careful, deliberate. Keep my breathing steady, keep my movements quiet. I'd only made it a few feet when I heard it. A low, almost imperceptible sound, like a heavy footstep, barely more than a whisper against the ground. I froze, my blood turning to ice. It was there, somewhere. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears, and I forced myself to stay calm, to stay still. Don't move. Don't breathe. I waited, my muscles coiled, ready to sprint if I had to. But the sound didn't come again. Only the silence. Was it stalking me? Had it seen me move? My mind was racing, trying to predict what it would do next, but there was no logic here. This wasn't a game I knew how to play. This was survival. Pure, raw survival. I needed to get back to the road. My car was wrecked, but if I could get to the highway, maybe I could flag someone down. Maybe I could find help. Maybe someone would believe me, or at the very least, get me far away from this nightmare. I moved again, inching my way through the trees, careful not to step on any branches. Every few steps, I'd stop, listening for it, waiting for the telltale sound of its approach. But the forest remained unnervingly quiet. Too quiet. I turned around, my heart hammering, expecting to see those glowing eyes behind me again. But there was nothing. No shadow. No hulking figure. Just the trees. Maybe it's gone. Maybe I've lost it. I didn't believe it for a second, but I had to hope. The minutes dragged on as I made my way through the woods, my body tense with fear. I kept the flashlight off, navigating by moonlight and the faint glimmer of stars above. My breaths were shallow and quick, my skin slick with cold sweat. Suddenly, a loud rustling sound shattered the silence. Something big, something fast, was moving through the trees, directly toward me. Oh God! It had found me. I bolted. There was no more time to be careful, no time to think. My legs moved on instinct, pumping as fast as they could as I sprinted through the forest. Branches whipped at my face, leaves tore at my clothes, but I didn't stop. The only thing that mattered was running, putting as much distance between me and that thing as possible. Behind me, I could hear it crashing through the underbrush, its footfalls heavy and deliberate, but gaining speed. It was chasing me. My heart pounded, terror surging through my veins as I pushed myself harder, faster. I had to get away. I couldn't let it catch me. I dodged around trees, barely managing to stay on my feet as I scrambled over roots and rocks. The thing was so close now I could almost feel its breath on my neck. A sickening growl echoed through the trees, low and guttural, vibrating through my chest. It was hunting me, and I was losing ground fast. Up ahead, I spotted a small ravine, its steep drop barely visible in the moonlight. I didn't have time to think, didn't have time to plan. I leaped, praying I'd clear it. My feet hit the ground hard, and I stumbled, rolling down the slope and crashing into the underbrush. I lay there for a moment, stunned, gasping for breath. My head was spinning, my body aching from the fall. I heard it pause at the top of the ravine, its heavy footfalls halting. For a few agonizing moments, I lay still, my body pressed into the dirt, holding my breath. Please don't come down here. Please don't find me. The creature let out another low growl, the sound vibrating through the trees. It was angry, frustrated. It wanted me. It knew I was close. I closed my eyes, willing myself to disappear, to blend into the earth. The seconds dragged on, each one more excruciating than the last. The sound of its footsteps started again, but this time, they were moving away. Slowly, methodically, it was retreating. I didn't dare move until the sounds faded into the distance. I was still too terrified to believe it had actually left. I lay there in the dirt, listening to the wind rustling the leaves, trying to calm my racing heart. The adrenaline was making my whole body shake, and my legs felt like jelly. After what felt like an eternity, I slowly pushed myself up, wincing at the sharp pain in my ribs. I must have hit a rock when I fell. The ravine had given me just enough distance to escape, for now, but I knew it wouldn't last. It was still out there, and it wasn't going to stop. I sat there, my body trembling, trying to piece together what little logic I could. What the hell was this thing? No one had ever said anything about something like this in Oregon. There were stories, sure, legends, BigFoot sightings, but none of them described what I'd seen, what had been hunting me through these woods. Whatever it wasn't just an animal. It was a predator, and it was intelligent. I had to keep moving. Staying here would only get me killed. I stood up, wiping the dirt and leaves off my jeans, and glanced around. I wasn't sure where I was anymore. The road seemed so far away now, and the woods stretched endlessly in every direction. But I wasn't giving up. Not yet. I switched on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness as I started walking again, slower this time, trying to be as quiet as possible. My ribs ached with every step, and my body felt like it was on the edge of collapse. But I kept going. I had to. If I stopped, that thing would find me again. And next time, I might not be so lucky. I stumbled through the dark forest, barely able to keep my legs moving. My body was screaming at me to stop, to rest, but I knew that stopping wasn't an option. Not anymore. My ribs ached from the fall, and every breath was shallow, ragged. The flashlight beam bobbed erratically in front of me, barely lighting the path. It was too weak now, its battery fading, just like my strength. The creature was still out there. I knew it. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, that primal sense of being hunted. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees taller and thicker, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. My thoughts were a jumbled mess of terror and exhaustion. I couldn't let it end here. I had to survive. The narrow trail I was following snaked its way through the woods, the ground uneven and treacherous. My feet slipped more than once on loose dirt and roots, and I had to catch myself from falling. But I kept moving. Faster. As fast as I could manage. Suddenly, I heard it again, those heavy, deliberate footsteps, crashing through the underbrush somewhere behind me. The sound was unmistakable. It was coming for me. My pulse spiked, fear surging through me like electricity. I whipped around, shining the flashlight into the darkness, but the beam barely cut through the trees. "God, no, please, not again," I whispered, my voice trembling. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it. The footfalls were growing louder, closing in. It was running now, its movements heavy and powerful, barreling through the forest like a force of nature. It was relentless. I bolted, my legs screaming in protest as I pushed myself harder than I thought possible. The flashlight flickered, casting wild shadows on the trees as I sprinted down the path. My lungs burned, and I could barely keep my footing, but I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. Not with that thing behind me. "Come on, come on," I gasped to myself, my voice barely audible over the crashing sounds of the creature's pursuit. "Just a little farther, Megan. Just keep going." The forest was a blur around me, the darkness pressing in from all sides. My mind raced, trying to figure out where I was, how far the road could possibly be. There had to be a way out. I just had to make it a little farther. A few more minutes. I couldn't let it catch me. A sudden thud behind me, so close, too close. My breath hitched in my throat as I glanced back, and there, just for a second, I saw it. The creature, its massive form moving unnaturally fast, its eyes glowing in the faint light of the moon. It was monstrous, towering over the trees, its arms swinging with terrifying force as it closed the gap between us. I screamed, my voice a raw, guttural sound as I pushed my legs harder. I could hear it crashing through the brush, gaining on me with every step. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The path ahead twisted sharply, disappearing around a thick cluster of trees. I didn't have time to think, to plan. I veered off the path, darting into the thick undergrowth, hoping the creature wouldn't be able to follow as easily through the dense trees. Branches whipped at my face, tearing at my clothes, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Behind me, the crashing sounds grew louder, more frantic. It was close. Too close. I burst through a thicket of bushes and stumbled into a clearing. For a brief moment, I was disoriented, unsure of where I was. But then I saw it, up ahead, barely visible through the trees, a set of headlights cutting through the darkness. A car. There was a road. Thank God, I gasped, tears of relief blurring my vision. I sprinted toward the lights, my heart soaring with hope. I was almost there, almost safe. If I could just make it to the road, flag down a car, I'd be okay. I'd get out of here. I'd survive. But as I broke through the final line of trees, the sound of the creature's footsteps crashed through the underbrush behind me. I could hear its ragged breathing, feel the ground shake beneath its weight. I glanced over my shoulder just in time to see it leap forward, its massive arms swinging toward me with terrifying force. I barely had time to react. I threw myself to the side, landing hard on the dirt as the creature's claws swiped through the air where I had been standing a second before. Pain exploded in my side, but I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline propelling me forward. The headlights were closer now, and I could make out the outline of the car. A pickup truck, its engine idling, as if someone had stopped in the middle of the road. I ran toward it, screaming, waving my arms, praying that the driver would see me, hear me. Help! Please! Help me! My voice was hoarse, barely a scream anymore. But the truck didn't move. The driver didn't react. I reached the edge of the road, just as the creature let out a deafening roar behind me. I threw myself toward the truck, pounding on the window with both hands. Please! Open the door! Help me! I cried, my voice breaking with desperation. But the driver, a man in his late 40s, wearing a baseball cap, just stared at me wide-eyed, frozen in terror. His mouth moved, but no words came out. He looked past me, his eyes growing wider, and I realized he was staring at the creature behind me. Before I could say anything else, the man slammed the truck into reverse, the tires squealing as he sped backward down the road, leaving me standing there alone. No! I screamed, but it was too late. The truck's taillights disappeared into the darkness, leaving me standing in the middle of the road. The creature's growl rumbled behind me, low and menacing. I turned, my heart pounding in my chest, and saw it standing at the edge of the trees, watching me. It didn't move. It didn't chase. It just stared, those cold, gleaming eyes locked on mine. For a moment, we were both still, frozen in the moonlight. My body shook with exhaustion and terror, my mind spinning. Why wasn't it attacking? Why was it just watching? Then, with a snarl, it turned and lumbered back into the woods, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. I stood there, panting, my legs trembling beneath me, unsure if I should run or collapse. The road was silent again, the forest still. I was alive. I had survived. But the terror wasn't over. I don't remember how long I stood there, shaking, staring at the spot where the creature had vanished. All I knew was that it was gone, for now, and I needed to get out of here. My body was bruised, battered, but still intact. Somehow, I had made it through the night. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The distant sound of an engine caught my attention, and I turned to see another car approaching, a set of headlights, slowly coming closer. I didn't waste a second. I ran into the middle of the road, waving my arms frantically. This time, the car stopped. A middle-aged woman rolled down the window, her eyes wide with concern. Are you okay? What happened? I choked on my words, glancing back at the woods. I need help. Something is out there. I barely made it. The woman frowned, clearly confused, but she nodded, motioning for me to get in. Come on, get in. I'll take you to the sheriff's station. I climbed into the car, my entire body trembling, my mind racing. As the car pulled away, the woman glanced at me in the rearview mirror. What exactly happened out there? She asked cautiously. I stared out the window, my heart still pounding, the memories of the night replaying over and over in my head. I opened my mouth to answer, but I couldn't find the words. I don't know, I whispered. But it's not over. The warmth of the car felt like a blessing after the freezing terror of the forest. The leather seat cradled my aching body as the hum of the engine slowly began to lull me into a daze. But no amount of warmth could take away the bone-deep fear that had wrapped itself around my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about it, those glowing eyes, the roar that had shaken my core, the feeling of being prey. The woman who had picked me up glanced at me through the rearview mirror, her face a mixture of concern and confusion. She hadn't asked many questions since I'd gotten in, only a few cautious words to make sure I wasn't physically hurt. I was grateful for that. Talking felt impossible right now. Do you want me to take you straight to the sheriff's station? She asked, her voice soft, almost tentative. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. I couldn't stop shaking. Even though I was safe now, at least, I hoped I was, my body hadn't caught up to the reality. It still felt like that thing was breathing down my neck, just waiting for the right moment to strike. The trees zipped by outside the window, dark and menacing. I couldn't take my eyes off them. Any moment, I expected to see the creature lurching out from the shadows, its hulking body crashing through the underbrush, ready to tear me apart. I blinked, hard, trying to focus on the woman's voice instead. "My name's Judy, by the way," she said gently, keeping her eyes on the road. "You're lucky I came through when I did. This road doesn't get much traffic at night." Lucky. That word felt wrong. There was nothing lucky about any of this. But I forced myself to respond, my voice shaky and barely above a whisper. "Megan. My name's Megan. Megan, you look like you've been through hell. I don't want to pry, but what happened out there?" Judy glanced at me again, her brow furrowed. I swallowed hard, my throat dry and tight. How could I explain what had happened? How could I put into words the terror, the feeling of being hunted by something that shouldn't exist? No one would believe me. Hell, I barely believed it myself. I don't know, I said, my voice cracking. Something attacked me. In the woods. It was huge. It wrecked my car. I tried to run, but my words trailed off as the memory of that creature's glowing eyes flashed through my mind again. I couldn't finish the sentence. The details felt absurd, unreal. Like a nightmare that refused to end. Judy's eyes flicked to mine again, concern deepening. An animal? A bear maybe? I shook my head, biting my lip. No, not a bear. It was bigger than that. I stopped myself before I said the word _BigFoot, the very idea sounded ridiculous, even to me. How could I expect her to believe something so insane, when I couldn't even fully comprehend it? It wasn't a bear, I repeated weakly, looking down at my hands, still trembling in my lap. Judy didn't press me. Instead, she turned her eyes back to the road and nodded slowly. "Whatever it was, you're safe now. We'll get you to the sheriff's office, and they'll take care of it." The word _safe echoed hollowly in my head. I didn't feel safe. Not even close. That thing was still out there. It hadn't stopped hunting me, it had let me go. For now. But I knew, deep in my gut, that it wasn't finished. I wasn't out of danger, not really. And there was no way the sheriff or anyone else could help me with something like this. As we drove into town, the neon lights of the diner and gas stations flickered in the distance. The small community felt like an island in the middle of the dark wilderness, its lights promising safety, but only on the surface. I clenched my hands into fists, trying to stop the shaking. What would I even tell the sheriff? How could I explain what had happened without sounding completely insane? Judy pulled up outside the sheriff's station, a small brick building that looked more like an office than anything else. A lone streetlight flickered above, casting pale light on the empty lot. She put the car in park and turned to me. "Do you want me to come inside with you?" I shook my head. No, I'll be fine. Thank you for the ride." Judy gave me a kind smile, though there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Are you sure? You're pretty shaken up." "I'll be fine," I repeated, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince her or myself. I grabbed my backpack from the floor and opened the door, stepping out into the cool night air. My legs felt like jelly, and I had to take a deep breath to steady myself. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask," Judy said, her voice softer now. "Take care, Megan." I nodded again, barely managing a weak smile, and watched as her car pulled away, leaving me alone in front of the sheriff's station. The building felt imposing now, even though it was small. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, feeling a sinking dread settle into the pit of my stomach. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to relive what had happened, to try to explain something I didn't even understand. But I had no choice. This was the next step. They had to know what was out there. Maybe they wouldn't believe me, but I had to try. Taking a deep breath, I walked up the steps and pushed open the heavy door. The inside of the station was as quiet as the town outside. A single officer sat behind the front desk, flipping through some paperwork. He looked up as I entered, his expression neutral at first, but then his brow furrowed as he took in my appearance. Torn clothes, dirt, blood from the cuts on my arms, and the look of someone who had been through hell. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice slow and steady. I need to report an attack," I stammered, my voice barely holding together. Something happened in the woods." He set his paperwork aside and stood, motioning for me to sit in one of the chairs by the desk. "Okay, let's take it slow. Why don't you start from the beginning?" I sat down, feeling the weight of exhaustion crush me. I was driving through the forest near Crater Lake. Something hit my car. I don't know what it was, but it smashed the window and it chased me. I ran into the woods to hide, but it kept coming. I barely got away. The officer frowned, pulling out a notepad. You say something hit your car? What kind of animal are we talking about here? I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. It wasn't an animal. But it wasn't like anything I've ever seen before. It was huge, bigger than any bear. It was walking upright, covered in fur. I know this sounds crazy, but it looked like BigFoot. The officer stopped writing and looked at me, his face a mask of disbelief. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but then closed it, glancing down at his notes. Bigfoot, he repeated slowly. I nodded, feeling the weight of his doubt pressing down on me. I could see it in his eyes. He didn't believe me. Why would he? How could he? Miss, I'm not saying you didn't see something, he said carefully, but it's likely you were dealing with a bear. We get reports of that sometimes, people thinking it's something else in the dark, especially if they're scared. But Bigfoot, you sure about that? I felt the frustration rise in my chest, but I pushed it down. I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It was real. It attacked me. The officer nodded, though his eyes remained skeptical. All right, we'll take down your report and send someone to check the area in the morning. I'll file this, but it might take some time to process. I could hear the dismissal in his voice. He wasn't taking this seriously. No one would. I stood up, my legs shaky again. Okay, thank you. As I left the station, the fear that had been gnawing at me only grew stronger. I had tried to warn them, but they didn't believe me. No one would. And that thing was still out there. I stepped out of the sheriff's station and into the cold night air, the door closing with a heavy thud behind me. The sound felt final, like the last nail in a coffin, sealing me off from any hope that anyone would believe what had just happened. The small town felt empty, eerily quiet under the flickering streetlights. A thin mist had settled over the pavement, curling around my feet as I stood there shivering. I wasn't sure what I had expected when I walked into the station. Maybe some form of validation, someone to take my story seriously, someone to say, yes, we've heard reports of this before, but I'd gotten none of that. Instead, I had been met with polite skepticism, the kind of look you give a person who's clearly rattled, but has mistaken a shadow for a monster. I took a deep breath, wrapping my arms around myself, as if that could protect me from the terror I knew was still lurking out there in the forest. The sheriff's words echoed in my head, their calm dismissal a stark contrast to the panic still thrumming through my veins. It was probably just a bear, he had said, that patronizing tone of someone trying to soothe a frightened child. People panic when they're alone in the woods at night. Their mind plays tricks on them. I had tried to explain, how the creature had stood upright, how it had stalked me through the trees, how it had attacked my car. But the more I spoke, the more I felt myself losing credibility. Each word only seemed to solidify the sheriff's belief that I was imagining things, that I had overreacted. Try to get some rest, he had said as I left. We'll look into it. Rest, the idea of sleep felt impossible. My mind was a constant reel of terror. Those glowing eyes, the way it had chased me through the woods, the sound of its growl echoing in the darkness. And now, the heavy realization that no one believed me. No one ever would. I rubbed my temples, feeling the tension build behind my eyes. I needed to leave this place, get back to my car, what was left of it, and drive as far away from here as possible. But even that felt like a distant hope. The damage to my car had been extensive, and I knew it wouldn't get me far. Still, I had to try. As I began walking down the empty street, I could feel the weight of exhaustion settling into my bones. The adrenaline that had kept me moving through the night was fading, leaving only a hollow ache in its place. My ribs hurt, my legs were sore, and my mind was a jumble of fear and frustration. I passed by the diner, where I had first sought safety after the attack. The lights inside were dim now, the place nearly deserted. A couple of locals sat in a booth near the window, sipping coffee, oblivious to the horror I had just experienced. I stared at them through the glass for a moment, a pang of jealousy striking me. They looked so normal, as if nothing could touch them, as if monsters didn't exist. But I knew better. I kept walking, my feet dragging along the cracked pavement, until I reached the small motel where I had checked in earlier. The neon vacancy sign buzzed faintly, casting a pale blue glow over the parking lot. I paused, staring at the worn-out building, and wondered if I could even face the thought of being alone in a room again. The walls would feel too thin, too vulnerable. I hesitated at the door, my hand hovering over the handle. I didn't want to be alone, but there was nowhere else to go. I couldn't ask anyone for help, not with this. No one would believe me. I was on my own. Inside the room, the dim light flickered weakly from the single lamp by the bed. The bedspread was an ugly brown, covered in a dated floral pattern, and the air smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke, even though the room was labeled non-smoking. I dropped my backpack on the floor and collapsed onto the edge of the bed, burying my face in my hands. I was alive. Somehow, I had made it through the night. But the relief that should have come with that realization never arrived. Instead, I felt more trapped than ever. Trapped by my own story, by the disbelief of everyone around me. I had survived something terrible, something that defied explanation, but now I was left alone with that truth, with no way to prove what had happened. I reached for my phone and stared at the screen. No signal. The sheriff had said they'd send someone to check on my car in the morning, but I didn't trust that. I didn't trust anything anymore. The memory of that truck driver leaving me on the road flashed through my mind again. His wide, terrified eyes as he backed away from me, abandoning me to face the creature on my own. I had screamed for him to stop, but he hadn't. He had just driven off, leaving me in the middle of nowhere. They don't believe you because they're scared. The thought wormed its way into my mind, cold and insistent. Because the truth is too much for them to handle. Even if they did believe you, what could they do? I stood up, pacing the small room, trying to shake off the suffocating sense of helplessness that was threatening to overwhelm me. I couldn't stay here. Not in this room. Not with these thoughts. I had to get out. I had to do something. I grabbed my coat and slipped it on, my hands still trembling as I reached for the door. Maybe if I walked around town for a bit, I could clear my head. Maybe I could find someone, anyone, who might listen, who might believe me. As I stepped outside, the cold night air hit me like a slap. The mist had thickened, swirling around the streetlights like ghosts, casting eerie shadows across the pavement. I walked aimlessly, my mind buzzing with the events of the night, trying to make sense of it all. But no matter how many times I replayed it in my head, it didn't make sense. None of it did. What had I seen? What was that thing? And why had it let me go? Why hadn't it killed me when it had the chance? I found myself back at the edge of town, near the dark line of the forest. The trees loomed in the distance, silent and foreboding. My heart began to race as I stared into the woods, half expecting to see those glowing eyes peering back at me from the shadows. A rustle in the trees made me jump. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, every muscle in my body tensing. Was it back? Was it watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike? But the noise was followed by the faint sound of laughter, a couple walking down a nearby street, their footsteps soft on the pavement. They passed by without noticing me, lost in their own conversation, unaware of the horror that lurked just beyond the trees. I stood there for a long time, staring into the darkness, feeling that same creeping dread I had felt all night. The creature was still out there. I was sure of it, and now I was the only one who knew the truth. But what good was the truth if no one would believe it? I turned and walked back toward the motel, the weight of that thought pressing down on me with every step. I woke up with a start, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The dim light of the motel room, the stale air, the sound of the heating unit rattling in the corner. It took a few seconds to remember. The night before, the woods, the creature. The fear hit me all over again, sudden and sharp, making my stomach churn. I sat up in the bed, clutching the thin blanket to my chest, my ears straining for any sound outside the window. But all I could hear was the faint hum of traffic on the highway and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. The creature had let me go. Why? I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, feeling the cold floor under my bare feet. The sheriff had promised to send someone to check on my car in the morning, but that promise felt hollow now. Even if they did find the car, even if they saw the damage, they wouldn't believe my story. They'd come up with some rational explanation. A bear, a fallen branch, anything but the truth. But I knew what I'd seen. And the longer I sat there, staring out the window at the early morning light filtering through the curtains, the more certain I became. The creature was still out there, somewhere, and I wasn't sure it was done with me yet. I couldn't stay in this town any longer. I had to leave. Even if my car was wrecked, I had to find some way out of here, before it found me again. I threw on my clothes, wincing as I moved. My whole body ached, my ribs sore from where I'd fallen in the woods. The cuts on my arms were still tender, the dried blood sticking to my shirt. I needed a shower, food, sleep. But none of that mattered right now. The only thing that mattered was getting out of here. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand and checked it, still no signal. Typical. I shoved it in my pocket and slung my backpack over my shoulder. As I opened the door to the motel room, the crisp morning air hit me, making me shiver. The sky was a dull gray, clouds hanging low and heavy, as if the world itself was waiting for something to happen. I started walking toward the sheriff's station, hoping they had at least found my car by now. The few people I passed on the sidewalk gave me odd looks, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and pity. I couldn't blame them. I probably looked like hell, disheveled, bruised, bloodied. And what would I tell them if they asked what had happened? The truth? No, that wasn't an option anymore. The truth was mine to carry alone. The sheriff's station was quiet when I arrived. A different deputy was sitting at the front desk, sipping a cup of coffee and scrolling through his phone. He barely looked up when I walked in, just glanced at me with the same disinterest everyone else in this town seemed to have for my story. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone bored. I reported something last night. The sheriff said he'd send someone to check on my car this morning. My voice sounded weak, tentative. I hated it. The deputy gave a small shrug and tapped something into his computer. "Yeah, they went out this morning. Didn't find anything. No signs of an animal attack or anything like that. Your car's banged up, but looks like it might have hit a tree. You're lucky you didn't roll off the road." I stared at him, the disbelief hitting me like a punch to the gut. "That's not what happened. Something attacked me. It wasn't a tree." He finally looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Look, ma'am, we've had people report some strange things out in the woods, especially after dark. It's easy to get turned around, spook yourself a bit. But there was no sign of anything unusual. If you want, I can give you the name of a mechanic in town who can take a look at your car." My stomach churned with frustration. "You don't understand. This wasn't me getting turned around. I wasn't scared of nothing. I saw it. It was..." He held up a hand, cutting me off. "I get it, okay? You had a rough night. But there's nothing else we can do. The report's been filed. If you want to pursue further investigation, you can talk to the sheriff when he's back. But there's no evidence to support any kind of attack. No evidence." The words felt like a slap. I knew there wouldn't be. That thing was smart enough to disappear without a trace. I could feel my hands trembling again, and I clenched them into fists, trying to hold myself together. There was no point in arguing. No one believed me. They never would. "Thanks," I muttered, turning toward the door. "I'll figure it out." As I stepped outside, the weight of the last 24 hours crashed down on me. Exhaustion, fear, frustration, they all pressed in from every direction. I was alone in this. I always had been. No one would ever believe what had really happened out there. I started walking again, not sure where I was going. The small town stretched out in front of me, quiet and unremarkable, like any other place in rural Oregon. The kind of town where nothing ever happened. But I knew differently now. I had seen the truth, felt it stalking me through the trees, heard it breathing down my neck. And now it was out there, free. As I made my way down the street, the mist clinging to the ground, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. Waiting. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see its massive form lurching out from behind one of the buildings. But there was nothing. Just the empty street, the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. I reached the edge of town, where the road stretched out into the forest again. The trees stood tall and silent, their dark branches swaying gently. I stopped, staring at the tree line, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't help but wonder, was it out there right now? Watching me? Waiting for me to make the wrong move? My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, blinking in surprise when I saw a signal bar. For a brief moment, I thought about calling someone, anyone. But what would I say? Who would I tell? No one would believe me, just like the sheriff hadn't, just like the deputy hadn't. I was alone with this. I turned my back to the forest, heading toward the main road that would eventually lead me out of town. The fear hadn't left me. It still clung to me like a second skin, and I knew it always would. I might be leaving this place, but I would never leave what had happened here. The creature had let me go, but I didn't believe for a second that it was gone. It was still out there, somewhere in those woods, and I had the sinking feeling that it would always be with me. No matter how far I went, no matter how much time passed, I would never escape the memory of those glowing eyes in the dark. I walked down the road, the mist swirling at my feet, and for the first time, I accepted the truth. The creature had escaped, and I was the only one who knew.